The material I used in the fake kidnapping of Minna Nurminen is based on the news and the documentaries made about it, which I bring up in the light that this case is a staged work carried out in cooperation with the authorities, where by the authorities I mean at least the Finnish authorities. The video material of the incident is Finnish from the True Crime series, which was produced by MTV3 and whose editors were Jarkko Sipilä and Pekka Lietinen during the making of the material. The case begins at the Helsinki apartment of Minna Nurminen of the KONE elevator family in Tulo on Wednesday, the 27th of May 2009. Nurminen was reported missing on the 30th of May. Minna Nurminen's mother is KONE's board chairman Hanna Nurminen, who belongs to the Herlin family and is one of the richest women in Finland. The main perpetrator of the kidnapping, i.e. Juha Turunen, transported Minna Nurminen in a wooden box from Helsinki's Tulo to the apartment he rented on the resin track in Turku. Turunen described the act as an act of desperation. Juha Turunen transported Minna Nurminen in a wooden box from Helsinki's Tulo to the apartment he rented on the resin track in Turku. According to his own words, Turunen drugged Minna Nurminen with ether, which sounds like a really ineffective plan, because even though I'm not a doctor, the effect of these inhaled gases is really fast, which is based on gas exchange in the lungs, and where the compounds inhaled with the gas enter the bloodstream much slower and in smaller doses than, for example, compounds absorbed in the stomach such as eye drops, which are proven to be an effective way to drug a person unconscious for a long time. If Turunen had really wanted this kind of kidnapping to succeed, he should have forcibly fed Nurminen with eye drops whose effectiveness is proven to be effective, unlike breathing ether vapors. But as with this setting, the case is too clearly well planned, not in terms of kidnapping but in terms of fake kidnapping, which is most likely Minna Nurminen's own and Antti Herlin's prank, to making the people believe in a lie, which helped Minna Nurminen to buy the world's strongest alibi for her future crimes, which will certainly not be a lie in the next time. Turunen transported Minna Nurminen, drugged with ether, in the stairwell in a transport box that was closed with a drill. Nurminen could not have been intoxicated by ether vapors all this time that Turunen was spent moving Nurminen from the 5th floor of the apartment building along the stairwell to his car. As a crime reporter, it's hard for me to believe that Nurminen wouldn't have screamed in this situation, when he wasn't in a drugged state and in a transport box going to Turunen's car at the least outside the building, where there must have been people moving on the street when Turunen loaded the kidnapping box into his car. Turunen drove Nurminen by car from Tulo in Helsinki to the Resignrati in Turku, which according to Google Maps takes about an hour and 51 minutes, which means that Nurminen should have been drugged many times during the journey, just like in the stairwell where Turunen dragged him in the kidnapping box. The house where Turunen kept Nurminen captive would seem to be a relatively inhabited place and too close to the center for kidnapping, and it would not be suitable for placing a kidnapped prisoner in a kidnapping booth or in general for transporting him to this house only drugged with ether. A location that is perfect for framing. When you look at this case from the point of view that the case is 100% framed, the building is the best place for this scam that was planned by the Herlin's rich family who have money so much that it pours out of doors and windows. Antti Herlin, who has his own media house, Sanoma Media, which includes Helsingin Sanomat. Location of the apartment was too good, where no one really pays any attention to the fact that Turunen carries the materials of his kidnapping booth that might even build up together with Nurminen, and for sure people cooperation with this rich Herlin family who ordered this kidnapping drama, and the motives of which I will explain later. In other hand, no one would pay attention even if Nurminen had gone out to the store in protective clothing during this kidnapping drama, when no one in Finland knew about this kidnapping. If it was really a kidnapping, This apartment would be the most difficult place to place a kidnapped person, because bringing a kidnapped person into a building where many people live would be extremely difficult, and it would include too many situations where you could actually get caught, because there are extremely many pairs of eyes in this residential area. If this case was a real kidnapping, Nurminen should have been placed in an apartment bought as far away as possible, where there was no residential area nearby. Looking at this case, I'm not at all surprised why Turunen didn't sit on the side of the police station with Nurminen, which would be the most rational action in the name of the logic of the case, when you look at who was investigating this case from the police's side and who are extremely familiar names to me as a crime reporter from their other stints in police positions. Kari Tolvanen, who is a former police crime commissioner who was the head of the Helsinki Police Violent Crime Unit and a former member of parliament. Tolvanen was framing the well-known Finnish killer Sanoma Media in a mental hospital, about which I have my own article and which I will tell a little about in connection with this case. Kari Tolvanen, who was deliberately pulling the criminal investigation of the Sanoma Media case away from the leaders of the Nokia mobile phone company and the Finnish medical psychiatry, whose activities are based on the diaries of Turku University skull shrink Hannu Lauma about the enemy without motives. Psychiatry that worked in the background of Media, whose core theme is to make their victims believe that they have to eat hard drugs that decrease the brain functions of these patients, which takes away all logic and rationality from their behavior, making them extremely prone to all impulsive behavior, such as in the case of Media, killing completely unknown persons without real motives. In my criminal investigations, Media has apparently stepped on the toes of Nokia's influential leaders, who have extremely good relations with the president of the Finland, Sauli Niinisto, who was an up-and-coming politician at the time, and who therefore owns these state institutions, such as inpatient psychiatry, which needs these people like Sanoma Media for mental hospitals, whose patients appear at the University of Turku's Jarmo in Hietala and Walter Major Helena's illegal medical studies, where they study the effect of various chemical compounds on the brains of these human rats. They guess the mechanisms of medically non-existent and imaginary diseases and refute previous guesses. If we look at the motives of the Media case again, which are not there, but for the medical research led by the University of Turku, this case fits like a nose to the head and a fist to the eye. Together with psychiatry, it is because they need these motiveless killers that they can buy in terms of money cheaply from the country's corrupt courts with their own expert opinions based onto the deliberate misinterpretations of medically non-existent and imaginary diseases with which these human rats can be bought as a basis for their own academic careers and salary payments that allow these researchers to practice their own professional excellence at the expense of the freedom and health of these cases staged in the courts, who believe these false expert statements like witches from the Middle Ages. These human rats of medicine staged in the courts are bound by the laws of a democratic state to forced treatments based on medically non-existent and imaginary diseases, which means that Jarmo Hietala and Walter Major Helena can research with the help of these patients whatever they want to research in the name of medicine, because all illegalities are refuted by the patients, and in these extremely closed institutions, they are transformed into symptoms of the patient's imaginary disease and into their characteristic delusions. When the highly trained doctors of a prestigious university are confronted with their own medical researches that guarantee their academic careers, while on the other side is a citizen who has been falsely convicted as mentally ill in the courts, who has been deprived of his right to self-determination and is not subjected to forced treatment by an imaginary based on a disease that would seem to be the holy grail for medical researchers. This activity where imaginary diseases are created for the patients and everything they say to the researchers are only delusions characteristic of an imaginary disease, is based on the special expertise of the University of Turku, i.e. misinterpretations of statistics, and by deliberately utilizing it, which is Hasse Karlsson's core expertise when he imitates the high virus in his own research projects by scrolling the physiological diseases of cancer from the depression of an autumn day on our suffering problem citizens where they unfortunately die. One of his study, Hasse Karlsson has studied the changes in brain structures in a patient who is almost certainly from a human rat farm managed by the University of Turku, bound by extremely dictatorial laws regarding forced treatments for a disease that is medically non-existent and imaginary, so in the name of it Karlsson can research whatever he wants to research in the name of medicine. It is a big question mark how much physical and mental violence is used on these patients in these institutions, in terms of how voluntarily they participate in these studies, because these extremely closed institutions, represented by VTH as human rat farms, within their walls, human life can be made so repugnant that these patients may agree to these tests of their own free will after being roped in the restraint cars for days. I have filed a criminal complaint against Hasse Karlsson, the evil that should have rested in the Nazi bunkers to the Finnish police, which they do nothing about it, but what kind of evil would it be that would easily fall? This only proves what the role of the Finnish police has become in Finland, i.e. covering up the crimes of decision makers and high-ranking authorities, taking advantage of their own credibility in the eyes of the people by pulling criminal investigations in the wrong direction, which saves other authorities such as medical psychiatry and their illegals actions with their patients. These human rats of medicine like sonocellin power, in other words, more valuable than gold in terms of weight to the illegal medical research of the University of Turku, and is the main reason why Mikael Lilius has landed in Finland with private medical services, of which he himself manages the largest company Mihilainen. Researchers from Turku University those carry out these illegal medical researches at the expense of the freedom and health of these staged human rats, whose recruitment process from the free side of our society is, however, extremely expensive, measured in the suffering of the families of all the bystander victims whom they take away as their last act defending against this official corruption that wants to subjugate these citizens as human rats for medicine. Of course, this activity does not weigh at all on the conscience of the professors of this University of Turku, Hannu Lauama, Hasse Karlsson, Chiaki Kakila, Jarmo Hayatala, Raimo Salakangas, Major Helena Walter plus Jana Suvisari and Jesper Ekelund, even though they are advertised on the facades of the University of Turku like Christmas throughout the year, which covers up to effectively all the illegal activities they do in the name of science, especially in the name of medicine, with the staged citizens of our country. Kari Tolvanen's action as a high-ranking official of the Finnish government in this case was to pull the criminal investigation away from other authorities, such as psychiatry, whose work is already well visible in Finland, where it is involved in all cases in Finland where a problem citizen decides to kill bystanders or themselves under heavy pressure from the authorities, where they sometimes incite these victims of psychiatry for mass killing projects even by utilizing the covert activities of the police, which in my opinion should be quite illegal activity from the police. Of course, the case was investigated by the faith and hope of the Finnish police, Chirianio's own authority and all his unprofessional expertise and incompetence, together with not as organized a crime league as the Finnish police is, Kijo Vilhusen from the United Brotherhood. The professional incompetence of this year's policeman, Chirianio, was completely based on the fact that the criminal himself came and sang about the crimes, as if this year's policeman would have solved the crimes himself without the songs of the criminals, which, for example, I do when I solve the crimes against humanity of the professors of the University of Turku, which they commit to the framed problem citizens of our country. In the name of helping and healing, of course, And guys of this level will not sing about their own crimes like the petty criminals arrested by Gerionio, from whom the Finnish state has withheld all basic income support, which means death by starvation like with the Jews in Nazi Germany, which must have been a great temptation to go into the drug business run by Gerionio. Third, but no worse in this group, is Juha Rautaimo, the Finnish police vacuum cleaner and the sandstorm of crime scenes, whose eye of the storm has no clues except for our problem citizens. Rautaimo, which already appears in 3 of my articles, which the Finnish police themselves messed up and I clarified and solved. Rautaimo, who should get the Mole of the Year award behind the fakeids among the authorities and distribute the things he stole, like Haahojalami Repose's entire property, to the underprivileged in Finland if his relatives are dead. Rautaimo, whose list of messed up criminal investigations is longer than the criminal record of many professional criminals, including the wills of Finnish hermits that he finds in the apartments of dead hermits, which contain silver candlesticks and table silver with burlap, including the apartments, of course. All of these are listed in the will, which has been addressed to the organization of policemen who have died in the line of duty, which only means in my eyes that Juha Rautaimo has been able to steal lonely Finnish recluses who have had distant relationships with their relatives with the help of the organization's activities. Such patterns of action from the Finnish police leaves a big question mark from where such actions have been learned, if not from the decision makers of our country, who nowadays establish one or another organization such as the European Union, in the name of which the approval of the people can be laundered from taxpayers' money and distributed to just about anything for the prevention of mental health problems in African countries, from which Eva Kailemeis can be drawn money between millions. To fill your own pillow.
It has voted to strip Greek lawmaker Eva Kaili of her role as vice president after she was arrested by the Belgian police. Kaili is one of 4 people targeted as part of a probe into alleged payments and gifts by Qatar to parliament members. The suspended lawmaker is currently in custody in Belgium, where she will remain until the 22nd of December. Kaili, who along with Qatar has denied any wrongdoing, was due to appear before judges with 3 other suspects on Wednesday but did not appear for the session. Her lawyer said that she had asked for more time to prepare for her detention hearing. Kaili's partner, Francesco Giorgi, who is a parliamentary assistant, will stay in detention. So will fellow accused Pier Antonio Panzeri, a former member of EU Parliament and founder of a non-profit campaign group. Earlier, her legal team insisted that she was innocent and did not know of the existence of cash found at her Brussels home. They said that her Italian boyfriend, Jorge, might have answers about the existence of the cash in question. The Belgian police have meanwhile released photos of suitcases and briefcases packed with cash recovered from one of the suspects' homes. While Kaili and her team deny any charges, EU Parliament leaders have condemned the alleged act of corruption.
Well, obviously we are very worried about the reports about corruption in the European Parliament, but I'm also very much supporting the European Parliament President, Metsola. I think she made some excellent interventions over the last 48 hours. She will be with us tomorrow at the European Council, and I will give her my full support in her work to get to the bottom of this.
It was an overwhelming majority. I think out of 630 people, a single one did not want to strip her of this position. So it's a clear sign that no one in the parliament accepts these kinds of corrupt behavior. No one thinks that she should represent our institution as vice president any longer.
Euroopan unionihan ei ole liittovaltio, ja sillä on toimivaltaa ainoastaan siltä osin, kuin jäsenvaltiot nimenomaisesti perussopimustensa kautta ovat sille toimivaltaa luovuttaneet.
There will be no sweeping under the carpet. We will launch an internal investigation to look at all the facts related to the Parliament and to look at how our systems can become yet more watertight. There will be no business as usual. We will launch a reform process to see who has access to our premises, how these organisations, NGOs and people are funded, what links with third countries they have. We will ask for more transparency on meetings with foreign actors and those linked to them. We will shake up this parliament and these towns, and I need your help.
Rockstar of the European Parliament Roberta Metzola's organisation called European Union, the very main focus and purpose is to give and offer the representatives of its member states the opportunity to launder and steal the member states' money for projects that are even bigger than the world, such as the fight against nature loss and mental health, and where all responsibilities and legislation can be outsourced as far as possible from the common people, which of course, as an action, is closer to a dictatorship of the authorities when controlling all activities, the interests of the elite of the states and not so much of the citizens, except of course in the hatred of the people and its breeding, which in turn allows the most cruel medical studies to be accepted in the universities in the name of medically non-existent and imaginary diseases that are being researched. And as Will Reitman already so beautifully and clearly states,
Euroopan unionihan ei ole liittovaltio, ja sillä on toimivaltaa ainoastaan siltä osin, kuin jäsenvaltiot nimenomaisesti perussopimustensa kautta ovat sille toimivaltaa luovuttaneet.
Rockstar of the European Parliament Roberta Metzola's democracy, which means illegal actions justified by popular hatred on the part of problem citizens, who as individuals are in no way able to defend themselves against the illegal actions of the authorities of democratic states, such as Finland, where the illegal actions of psychiatry with individuals are overrepresented in all democratic states, such as in Finland, where all school shooters were clients of psychiatry and were medicated by them. It is shame to me saw how this kind of leadership that Metsola can carry out with his own personal abilities has step a wrong side promoting democracy as it is like a religion of good but which allows all the atrocities that had to remain in the Nazi bunkers. It is not the dancing baby of the Finnish politics and the hyena of the social democratic Sanoma Media who poses with double murderers and betray the elders of our country with the fake advertising of the law proposal that she promotes together with the transgender legislation and whose leadership I have to be afraid that beats my one-man army, which engine is running with the spirit of the world's biggest and bravest woman ever walked on this planet, Sophie Scholl, the true leader of the resistance, women's and humankind. German hero activist who had to die in front of something that our dancing baby of the Finnish politics Sanoma Media knows a very little about. But I have told Roberta Metsola that, it is me who can give you what you really want. Forget the rock star, it only lasts for a moment, join my one man's army and live forever. In Germany, where the Germanwings pilot was believed to have ingested high-grade chemical compounds for a medically non-existent and imaginary disease, 150 people died, the causes of which fell completely unfairly on the neck of the drugged victim of psychiatry and medicine, even though the real culprit of the accident is psychiatry, which is bigger than the medieval church, together with its medically non-existent diseases, for which it so desperately seeks credibility that it doesn't hesitate at all about the possible consequences when it feeds hard drugs to a Germanwings pilot. Medical care, whose core activity should be helping the patient, but bouncing Lubitz from one psychiatrist to another and drugging him with hard drugs is a very normal activity for a drug dealer, which is the way psychiatry operates in nowadays. Germanwings pilot who was drugged with medicine what causes high suicidal thoughts was not able to fight against this ruthless activity of psychiatry which has eaten lots of innocent patients in Finland and which rely on misleading and false medical research with drug therapies with Nazi medicines. Even though Lubitz's father, Gunther Lubitz, tried to defend his own son's innocence together with Tim van Bevier, The completely baseless statements they made towards the criminal investigators flow mainly to provoke the grieving relatives of the bystander victims, which this duo does really well, which of course leaves us wondering about Gunther Lubitz's real desire to clear his own son's reputation when it is mainly a provocative action on the part of the victims' relatives, and how Gunther was not at all interested in my contact to him, which I made via LinkedIn, when I had more to offer than completely baseless claims without any concreteness. However, the same as what Gunther Bevan duo tries, to clear Andreas Lubitz's name with absolutely baseless and provocative statements, the same does not apply to the abilities of Minna Passi, a Finnish national treasure and war hero of corruption, who eats conspiracy theories like breakfast and arouses chills in the village rallies of the Finnish blue team of stupids, has left in Finland the big and mighty Olli Isotalo of Patria without an alibi, and the white king of the coalition Sauli Niinisto without a blue clothes, and when my one-man-s army, whose engine is running with the spirit of world's biggest and bravest woman ever walked on this planet, Sophie Scholes, stands up to defend the most hated person in German and the victims of medical psychiatry who are framed, wrongly medicated and provoked into actions in our society, it is at least the second best defense in the world after my predecessor, Sophie Scholl and White Rose, who is also, just like myself, I defend the wrongly convicted of my own era, who have been the target of manhunts carried out in the name of democracy and the inexplicability of medical psychiatry, and in front of which these individuals are at least in a defenseless position in this massive and illegal cooperation, which takes place behind the facades where the drugs that lower the brain functions of psychiatry are at the very center, just like in the cases of Andreas Lubitz and all the problematic citizens of Finland who have been left on the collision course of the murderous policy of Sauli Niinisto, the White King of the coalition. Although my one-man-s army, just like the illegal activities of psychiatry, are not bounded by the state borders, my one-man-s army is not held back even by the temporal limitations of life and time when it has called one of the greatest women ever walked on this planet, Sophie Scholl, to my ranks, which is nevertheless something else than a beautiful supermodels burned on the altars of media by the rock star of the European Parliament Roberta Metsola to cover up the real activities of her own organization that are carried out behind the facades. If some impartial journalist head up shoulders and comes to sniff behind the facades of the European Parliament where the unofficial business is managed. And even though we are living in the golden age of feminism, there is no doubt with whom this world's greatest woman who ever walked on this planet, Sophie Scholl, would stand if she heard my version of the actions carried out in the facades of the democratic government model in the name of medical psychiatry, and how the youngest and most beautiful Prime Minister of all time, Finland's Sanoma Media, is nothing more than a puppy that is on a tight leash of Ursula von der Leyen's. Saying yes to about anything on this new propaganda minister of Germany is proposing.
If you may, Ursula, I want to give a little praise to you. I cannot imagine better president for the EU Commission during these difficult times. Ursula has been real power player, and it's been an honor to work with you.
Full of empty promises to the Finnish elderly and Saul's blue panties under the red dress of the Social Democrats. Because Lubitz trusted the word of the doctor, which seems to be absolutely a big mistake for all these patients, those were lured, drugged and seduced by psychiatry. Rock star of the European Parliament Roberta Metsola, who believes in democracy like a resurrection of Jesus, is of course understandable in his position and that of other state decision makers. Because democracy where the people are represented by the media is an illusion of the people that the decision makers are listening to, and this democracy does not take into account minority groups at all, a good example of which is problem citizens who are attracted to psychiatric clinics with positive advertising about a new life, at least in Finland, by the state-owned propaganda machine YLE. The European Commission, which finances Prony research, in which the team from the University of Turku is involved, whose leaders, Jarmo Hayatala and Raimo Salakanga, I have filed a criminal complaint in Finland for their illegal medical studies that they conduct on staged problem citizens of our country, who are lured to psychiatric clinics with overly positive advertising. It is really strange that this kind of medical activity is generally supported when it is a medically non-existent disease that is completely dependent on the person who interprets the patient's behavior. A democracy that would seem to be synonymous with a dictatorship that specializes in illegal activities with minorities that are accepted by popular anger that has been heaped on maximum problem citizens when they have been provoked to commit acts that shock the community with depressant drugs that circulate the country as antidepressants. Democratic countries whose authorities carry out illegal activities through state agencies, such as the largest drug trade in Europe led by the Finnish police, which activity is being dumped on the shoulders of the head of the drug unit, Jyri Aunio, when he is sacrificed in front of the people for the sake of the credibility of government agencies, which activity has most obviously been an activity approved by the decision makers of our country, which collects and frame problem citizens to state prisons and mental hospitals for the cancellation of other authorities' salary payments. Eva Kale's suspicions of corruption are the most attention-grabbing, and what is this drama actually covering up? But if anything, it is for sure that the rock star of the European Parliament Roberta Metsola runs out of beautiful supermodels from her own ranks that she can sacrifice on the altars of the media rather than the Finnish national treasure and war hero of corruption Minna Nurminen's abilities runs out of talents. But what really scares me as a crime reporter is Finland's joining NATO, where Finland was driven by the new plague of Europe, the Black Death of problem citizens, the double agent who defected to the Kremlin's tables, the White King of the coalition and the new rise of the Aryans, Sauli Niinisto for 30 years, the war started by Mr. Putin, which my in criminal investigations, there is a war agreed behind closed doors, where Sauli Niinisto certainly has a big part when you look at what is happening in Finland in the field of the authorities, where fear is exploited in the best possible way, aiming it at the people who, in the midst of trouble, accept the most harmful solutions from the decision makers who only benefit the decision makers. But more about this in its own article. Minna Nurminen, who according to the story was taken to the kidnapping box built by Juha Turunen, which was all a stumbling block in this case, revealing that this kidnapping was orchestrated by media mogul Antti Herlin and the corruption in Finnish society financed by him. If you look at this booth and think of yourself in the same situation, after at least couple of sleepless nights and the initial panic, the person inevitably starts to question his situation where he is and starts looking for a way out of his situation. This kidnapping booth that Turunen has built contains almost untouched wool on the walls, which leaves the whole kidnapping in question and whether it was staged, as I believe 90% of the time. I discuss the staging and motives of the kidnapping in my own title. If a woman who had been kidnapped for 17 days had really been kept in this booth, the prisoner would have been torn between the strands while looking for an exit from the booth, and how the kidnapped person would have tried to lift the booth to test its structures. This booth looks more like a children's playhouse, which is nevertheless in pretty good condition, rather than where a kidnapped person was held hostage for 17 days. The picture above shows how even the grey tape has remained almost perfectly attached to the carpet, even though living in such a low booth would require squatting and all kinds of abnormal movement patterns for a person, such as walking in a quadruped. From the picture above, it can be clearly seen that Turunen's booth is a staged structure made by a lawyer, the whole of which has not been thought of in terms of operation, which means that this booth has not been opened 17 times as Turunen claimed, which means a daily meeting with the kidnapped Minna Nurminen. This statement is supported and evidenced by the perfectly intact point of the will at the two lowest nailing corners. If Turunen had opened this booth 17 times, the will at the nailing corners would be completely shredded. Although the will could have been moved, but they would not stay in place as you can see in the picture. These wills on the side wall do not seem to be closed in any way. If we look at the locking of the interception booth, which is apparently done by screwing in an angle iron, there is a big question mark as to whether this door has a hinge, but I'm guessing there isn't. It would be getting the screws of these nailing corners in the same place every time the door was opened, according to Turunen, once every day for 17 days. This arrangement of the screws in the same holes is hampered by the following factors. Disadvantage 1, wool. Multiple wool on both sides of the door and wall made of plywood would cause problems in the everyday opening situation in securing the door in the same place. Disadvantage 2, the items in the booth and the kidnapped girl. In addition, there are other things in the booth that, if wedged, would cause the door to change shape, and according to the story there was a kidnapped person inside, who most likely would have tried to escape at least once. If Turunen's story were true, this picture would most likely have a completely torn and broken booth for the wills that were on the floor. The probability is even so high that at this point it can be said that Turunen and Nurminen are lying about the reality of the kidnapping and how it was planned by them and a few other people who participated in this operation and which was run through the judicial system of our legal state with sentences. This action shows how rotten our judicial system is and how distorted and minded the members of this rich family are when they stage Nurminen's kidnapping with the greatest probability only for the desire to create good relations with the leaders of our state's institutions, which in my opinion is not a good idea when you look at the kind of staging they have carried out. The nailing corner in the picture looks too good for 17 opening times with all the disadvantages when there should be a kidnapped girl inside the booth. If the soundproofing of the capture booth is taken into consideration, the black area in the upper picture indicates the absence of a part about the thickness of wool. There is, of course, a big question mark. Is there something missing from this? But without insulating the upper part of the booth, it certainly has an impact on the sound insulation of the booth. If you look at how far Turunen planned his work, which, however, was completely framed, possibly even in collaboration with Nurminen, which I will explain in the second point, leaving such a gap is, to say the least, negligence, which is difficult to understand if it were not framed. In this picture, even more insulation is gone, and in the corner, the plate is placed so high that it is difficult to get a whole plate to stay on it, like next to a wall that is wedged between the kidnapping box and the wall. Of course, you could put a cut piece here, but has the police taken it away, or in the case of Finland, stolen it by Juha Turunen, maybe even with the help of a will? And where are the rest of the wool sheets with the larger opening and how are they attached with the kidnapping box? However, one of these wool sheets has been left on the floor and standing next to the others, and I don't really think that it would stay in place even despite small movements. This picture clearly shows how there is no soundproofing on the floor of the booth at all, which means that the person kidnapped in the evening has almost been able to talk to the person living downstairs if they shout a little louder. From the pictures above and below, you can clearly see how the wool of the door and roof of the abduction booth have remained perfect even though the door has been opened 17 times, according to Turunen. This could be believable if extreme caution is taken in the cases. But if it is a matter of keeping a kidnapped girl in a booth, it would be extremely difficult to fasten the door so that the wool would remain as in the picture as well as in a situation where a person is kidnapped in a kidnapping booth. Attaching the capture booth to the floor. None of the pictures showed how the capture booth was attached to the floor, but I'm guessing that it wasn't attached to the floor at all, because if you look at all the flaws that the capture booth already had in terms of fixing the door, Turunen has not attached the booth to the laminate at most, or that he would have bolted it to the concrete floor. This booth can definitely be lifted up from the floor by human power from inside the booth. Even if the booth had been screwed to the laminate would almost certainly have come off the floor from its own grooves after being shaken for a long time. One visit lasted 5-10 minutes. If we look at the time Turunen stated that he spent in the apartment, he cannot do anything at this time other than take the trash out of the apartment. The time required for such a hostage drama, when taking care of the survival of the person in this booth without him escaping, the right time for this would be at least 1 hour. But I believe that this time would be even longer in reality, in a real hostage kidnapping situation where this time stated by Turunen would be the time that can be allowed for the kidnapped for the permitted time of leaving the person unguarded. An abduction booth whose door is fixed with 3 corner plates, the time it takes to open and close it would be something like 10 minutes if the case is looked at from the point of view that this is being done for the first time. This time could be shortened to perhaps 5 minutes with practice, but not less than that, since it would still be a kidnapped woman whose keeping in such a booth would be an absolute prerequisite, and it could not be jeopardized by any Formula Garage tire change speeds. This time, even at the maximum performance, would not be enough to deal with the hostage, where one would have to forget about checking the places, to see if the person, for example, was allowed to leave the booth during all 23-50 minutes that Turunen was away from the apartment. Where was Minna Nurminen during the kidnapping? It is clear to me that Nurminen has not lived in this abduction booth for more than a day, either imprisoned or free, because there would be many traces of that in the form of peeling tape on the floor and the attempts of the kidnapped woman to examine the weaknesses of the abduction booth and how to escape. Criminal investigation of kidnapping. I have to say that when I saw Nurminen's kidnapping at the beginning of the story, when the policeman's own dream, which I was very familiar with, was investigating this case, I could already in my imagination connect this case to a completely fake one, where Juha Turunen has apparently been ordered out to rake out clues when the kidnapping box is in such good condition, as if Turunen were swinging around this crime scene with his own vacuum cleaner. The criminal investigation was reported mainly nothing through the media, unlike the Annie Laura case, from which you can clearly see with my criminal investigation expertise that the case is almost indisputable when it comes to the police's criminal investigation, which otherwise in modern Finland can no longer be trusted in terms of how much they have been washed by Juha Turunen. Judging from the scant coverage of the criminal investigation, I could even say that there is not even much that is wanted to be leaked to the public because this case is definitely a framed case. A policeman who endlessly repeats his incompetence in criminal investigations. A stupid group that just doesn't seem to learn to look at the background of the victim of a crime, even though with its experience this should already be a very routine activity and it stumbles every time. This case does leave one wondering if the Finnish police are really so incompetent that they don't notice that this was a case of fake kidnapping, or if media mogul Antti Herlin has anointed them with elevator money so well that they dare not sing Herlin's songs. Litigation. In my opinion, the trial of the case was little reported and was handled quickly without any complaints about the district court's decision, after which the proceedings of the case can be quickly buried in public and the case can be declared a kidnapping, using the credibility of our country's authorities and government agencies, which in reality have been bought for corruption with the money of media mogul Herlin. Juha Turunen. If you look at the case so that the focus is on Juha Turunen as a person, this kidnapping does not make any sense. The case is exactly what the blue team of the stupid group absorbs into itself as if it were some kind of multiple reflection of the skeleton from Lake Bottom, reminding the stupid group of its activities, how it is simply not able to learn from its mistakes and which, without a few shooting stars, is nothing more than a village rally with moped boys where you drive a car donuts in the air. Juha Turunen's video. Turunen, who said in a YouTube video that the reason for the kidnapping was getting into a spiral of debt and a marital crisis. If you look at Turunen's work history and education, this is almost impossible to believe if someone hasn't piled on Turunen a lawyer like dirty and deliberately unjustified financial compensation, which unfortunately is a very familiar activity to me as a customer of National Pension Institute, and it extremely unfairly denies basic income support and puts mandatory payments into foreclosure even though I should have a legal right to them. The video in which Turunen sobs about his act is to me nothing more than an average Finnish actor's promise, which nevertheless rains down on the credibility and justice of our country's authorities, and that the only culprit here is Juha Turunen, who takes the blame, even though the case was investigated by the police's own dream team, whose methods I am already very familiar with, a relationship that leaves the leaders of all organized crime organizations in our country speechless. In the video, you can see what can be seen from many of the cases I have investigated, i.e. these people, like many people convicted of manslaughter in the name of mental health problems, are not really typical or capable of murder under normal circumstances. But these problem citizens in psychiatric clinics have been assigned to medical treatment of depression with drugs, which are actually drugs that lower brain functions and destroy the immune and nervous system of these citizens, and under whose influence they are extremely impulsive to commit even unexpected killings on the spur of the moment when irritated and provoked. Just as Juha Turunen also presents in the video, he is not a kidnapper type, and Turunen is in no way capable of committing a kidnapping or any other crime, excluding staging and embezzlement, which also includes this fake kidnapping. The background to Turunen's actions and confession can't be anything other than media mogul Papa Herlin's elevator money, which takes care of the rest of Turunen's life, and that he can live a relatively normal life somewhere in the world, maybe even in Spain, where all the criminals of the Finnish police tipster model run away to write their own biographies, Jan Narksai Tranberger and Nico Alongranta. With this action, Papa Herlin has bought our country's authorities for himself with the help of relationships that were created with the authorities with the help of this imaginary and fake kidnapping drama. Juha Luhi. Usually people change their name to forget the incident, which helps the perpetrators of the crime to continue living. The former Turunen did a complete U-turn and took his new last name after the parking center Luh, where he picked up the ransom money. Quite a strange behavior if it had been a real kidnapping. Turunen, which is now under surveillance. This activity is carried out by our country's stupid group whose specialty is village rallies, and if you think about this case from the point of view of a fake kidnapping, then does the activities of these government authorities make any sense anymore? Of course, I hope that any of our country problematic citizens don't have to face this kind of corruption, but that seems to be only wishful thinking if you look at the case Jimmy Kartunen, who was euthanized like a stray dog medically because he was unprofitable citizens in front of the murder policy of Sauli Niinisto. It's a shame to say these things in public because it helps Juha Turus and other accomplices to avoid being exposed. But Turunen's whereabouts, bank accounts and entire wealth should be re-examined, and what abnormal has happened in his life if the reference is a normal perpetrator, because there is great doubt that the whole kidnapping is a fake, staged thing and financed with media mogul Papa Herlin's elevator money. Motives for kidnapping. When I have studied the cases of our country's problem citizens, this kind of action as a person in need is mostly a basic assumption, which, however, is due to the active action of the authorities due to the background of these citizens, where they are isolated from the labor market, which would seem to be at least the wealth of Antti Herlin's empire as the richest person in Finland, and the taking away of the basic income support of these problem citizens by the state with completely arbitrary rules, who are not entitled even to criminals, but which the Finnish state authorities target the most disadvantaged citizens of our country, which drives them close to animal defense methods in the face of this official corruption and manhunt done by the Finnish authorities in full cooperation each other, the purpose of which is to drive our country's problem citizens out of their homes and completely penniless without food, which could already be called a state of emergency. What? The Finnish authorities take advantage of these human rats when they drive them to the human rat farms of the University of Turku for medical use, which is, surprise surprise, an activity funded by media mogul Antti Herlin's KONE Foundation and where Minna Nurminen works as a Finnish language teacher to foreign visiting students and researchers, who do go a lot, at least in this medical psychiatry research, which revolves around the human rat business. Mikael Liljus Turunen, who as a former employee of the University of Turku, in my opinion, carried his cards together with Minna Nurminen regarding this human rat business, that this kind of activity would not raise inquiries towards the state authorities, but that it would always be a desperate act of an individual person, without any outsider having a purposeful influence, which is true in the case of Turunen but not for the problem citizens of our country, who are driven to these human rat farms and which would seem to be, at the very least, a new territorial occupation by Antti Herlin and Mikael Liljus when you look at what is happening in Finnish healthcare, i.e. taking away and closing services, which is almost identical to Mikael Liljus from the days of Fortum when he renovated it empty of employees. Unlike in Fortum's case, this time taking away these medical services is not as easy as firing Fortum's employees, to which Liljus seems to share in response that the purpose of the company is only to make a profit for its owners, which does leave a big question mark about the operation of Mihailinen, which offers medical services, which Liljus manages from its foreign funds through this action, where state institutions are being closed to its citizens, is too identical to the former CEO of Fortum, so Liljus has completely different thoughts regarding Finnish medical care than helping the citizens of our country, to which he has distributed statements in connection with Fortum, that the main goal of companies is to make money and profit for their owners, which leaves a big question mark as to what Mikael Liljus has come to the healthcare industry for, because he has not come to help anyone but the state elite, which can be seen by taking away these services. But I don't think that Liljus has only come to shut down Finns' medical care, but he, just like Antti Herlin, as a true capitalist, has sniffed out the human rats of medicine in whose role the problem citizens of our country would be extremely productive, even in the opinion of Sauli Niinisto, the Black Death of problem citizens, as if they were hanging on the hatches of the state treasury. Downsizing of medical care services with the help of the Nursing Assessment Act. The Miss Vogue loved by the people and its elderly and the SDP's red hyena who dances in Saul's blue bikini, whose youth and beauty drove down the nurse rationing law, which in reality will prevent the services of the elderly with the help of the labor shortage created by the medical care itself, which was created with the help of the private companies providing medical care services that Mikael Liljus has brought to Finland with the approval of Sauli Niinisto, whose real purposes can already be seen and stated. This combination will be used completely arbitrarily on the side of medical care, and it can be used to drive the elderly to death even in ditches, and to close down care homes with the help of a shortage of nurses regulated by the medical care itself, where nurses are transferred between companies. How fun it is to present a labor shortage on paper. This action was carried through with the external beauty of SDP's red hyena and the essence of a star created by YLE's propaganda apparatus. SDP's red hyena, who collects the thanks and praises of all the elderly for the law promoted and pushed by Miss Vogue, the purpose of which is completely the opposite, and from whom I will get angry looks when I defend them for exposing the SDP's red hyena's coat-turning trick, which is seen from a completely different perspective due to the false advertising of YLE's propaganda machine, which I have to endure, just like my predecessor Sophie Scholl was rejected by the Germans when she defended the Jews from Hitler's laws, by which these poor humans were gassed from their lives when their social contribution had been taken from them by force with the help of medicine, just like the researchers at the University of Turku are doing with the human rats in our country's mental hospitals, who do not die without Hannu Lauerman's approval in these institutions before they have been able to make a contribution to society with the help of medicine. Antti Herlin and Sanoma Media Holdings. It's clear that Herlin doesn't do this because of the money that pours out of the doors and windows, but the background of such cocks is nothing but power and what can be done with it. Currently, Herlin's ownership in Sanoma Media entitles him to the largest number of votes as an individual, so it can be said that he has great power to guide the Finnish people through his media, for example by creating a new minority group in our society that can be utilized by employing Turku University researchers in our country. Of course, this has many benefits in the field of medicine, which can be carried forward with the help of these framed human rats. When you look at what is happening in Finland, i.e. Sonna-Selänpää-like mix-ups among our problem citizens, which leads them to the research tables of chemical compounds to be examined by Jesper Ekelund, Walter Major Helena and Jarmo Psychosis Hayatala, and the richest man in the country is demanding with a doomsday voice the organization of treatment for these problem citizens, which seems to be the role of a human rat in the name of the mental hospital's imaginary diseases. What does Herlin do, and why would he bother with Sanoma Media when he already owns an elevator company that has made him the richest person in Finland? This activity is done only because of power, and what's worse, by playing it into the dirty plans of Turku University's Friend Club, into a business carried out by our problem citizens in the field of medicine. Herlin's doomsday declarations in the news. It is a big question mark what else Antti Herlin will do with the power bought with his money with our decision makers, but I see the privatization of medical care and Herlin's declarations MTV3, these young people must get treatment, as extremely dangerous for our problem citizens when you look at what is happening in psychiatric clinics in Finland. The private side, which is completely the realm of Herlin and Mikael Mihailinen Lilius, and it is clear as day that money is being made in this activity at the expense of the health of our country's problem citizens on the medical side. Minna Nurminen and electrical hypersensitivity. According to the news, Minna Nurminen's mother suffers from an electricity allergy, which at the beginning of my career I falsely thought was just attention seeking, which at this point in my career is strongly turning in the direction that this rich family has put criminal heads together with the researchers of the University of Turku, which has jointly taken over medicine and, in its name, knew the creation of diseases, using the statements of experts in the respective fields. For example, in the case of Minna Nurminen regarding electrical hypersensitivity, the real roots of which go no further than medieval witches, which was at least as difficult to explain as Minna Nurminen's electrical hypersensitivity from a scientific point of view. This activity will fall on the necks of our country's uneducated citizens when they get sick, when the medical care believes that they are suffering from medically non-existent diseases for which they have to eat harsh chemical compounds. The multi-billion-dollar business of medicine and the academic careers and salary payment of Turku University researchers Jarmo Hayatala and Walter Major Helena. Minna Nurminen, who, based on proven news coverage, has created a medically non-existent disease, at least in the public's imagination, and in the name of which it is good for her to retire with her pockets full of millions from the KONE elevator company, unlike our country's problem citizens whose bodies have been destroyed by chemical compounds fed to them, which makes them no longer capable of a working life, but whose the symptoms are not taken seriously and they are not allowed, for example, on sick leave, which in our society means falling into a hunger trap, i.e. relying on the subsidies of the people's pension system, which can cancel these subsidies completely arbitrarily, driving these problem citizens into a completely unsustainable situation and a spiral of debt that cannot be survived in the face of the completely arbitrary actions of the Finnish state, alive without being guilty of food to steal, completely penniless. Now that Minna Nurminen has successfully created a new disease, at least in the minds of the people, which she supports with millions of KONE elevators and the self-financed electric sensitivity foundations that she has founded to increase credibility, and to this mix is added media mogul Antti Herlin's doomsday declaration on MTV3 News, where he is demanding access to treatment for our country's problem citizens who are depressed and for whom nothing is done other than being fed harsh chemical compounds to the depression of an autumn day, which can be proven to lead to human rat farms managed by the University of Turku, which appear in the illegal medical studies of Turku University researchers Jarmo Hayatala and Walter Major Helena, tied to medically non-existent and imaginary diseases with the help of forced medical care laws. Aren't these Natsi Papa Herlins? The MTV3 News of the declaration is more about advertising and lobbying for its own new territorial conquest in order to attract these problem citizens of our society to resort to medical psychiatric services, which are structured in such a way that it leads to a proven human rat of medicine that fascinates Antti Herlin for crimes against humanity, medical abuse and ethnic cleansing, and which in Finland is so big thanks to Sauli Niinisto, the White King of the coalition, that gives me the right to say these things out loud. Questioning the brick and mortar business of this association is the same as questioning Hitler's ideology in Nazi Germany, which, if said in the wrong place, would lead to the human rat farms of the University of Turku for the use of medicine, and these places are definitely psychiatry clinics that have the right to use medicine demonstrably wrongly against people when it feeds hard-class chemical compounds to problem citizens with medically non-existent and imaginary in the name of diseases. Creating corrupt relationships with authorities. These patterns of cooperation, in which the kidnapper of a staged millionaire girl was chased by the forces of the army and the police, where the cooperation between the authorities deceives the people by publishing lies about the case through the press, is exactly the African pirate state in the name of which the coalition's unwanted parliamentary candidates can be murdered, as happened with Tuomas Tresvuori. I think it is an extremely dangerous activity to teach the Finnish police to lie like this, especially when you look at how the Finnish police have started to act after this case, i.e. to give biased statements about criminal investigations. Jauni Kaupilajaliviaska church arsonist. Tuomas Tresvuori is the coalition's unwanted MP candidate who was lured into the political backyard of Jutta Urpilainen of the European Commission, i.e. to the African states by the misleading mandate of the arms manufacturer Patria, together with Suvi Linden, about whom I have filed a criminal report with the Finnish police for assassination in which Patria's former CEO Olli Isotalo acted as the other person. It is unclear to me what the motives of Tresvuori's murder were, but they could have been moral, which falls around Hashmatu, which is almost controlled by women, at least with the help of the media, and in the name of which, even from the shelter of anonymous sources, the coalition MP Will Rydman can be passed into the ranks of basic Finns to rant about immigration policy. It's clear to me that when Isotalo denies that he didn't know about this gig that he himself was organizing on behalf of the arms manufacturer Patria together with Suvi Linden, And you can see it more from the news and how he is not aware of his own company's operating methods, which was easy to put in Finland as the reason for sending Trasvuori to Uganda to be murdered, but which was later found to be black and white in the form of an agreement. With all this incoherent activity and reporting that is full of lies, there is no credence in Isotalo's statement that Linden has nothing to do with Patria. Based on previous lies, Isotalo is lying about this as well, and Linden was the main player in this ordered murder, which was carried out in cooperation with Patria's management and which Isotalo tries to deny in every possible way by adding the immunity of the conspiracy theories upon the normal corruption, which, however, statistically speaking from Isotalo's mouth, is a complete lie. This kind of acting from Isotalo, trying to cover the truth underneath the conspiracy theories, gives more proof that these conspiracy theories is created by the media for the leaders of the country to cover all their crimes underneath it. I have an article coming out about conspiracy theories, where I will explain how they work in more detail. Olli Isotalo, who, as the former CEO of Patria, has replaced Eino Naikopi as a stonewalled debater, and Gerionio as lying, has set new foundations in terms of controversies and lies when he pours the hot pot of conspiracy theory on Linden's and Patria's cooperation patterns from the duo's joint travels, that if any line reporter tries to open this treasure chest of secrets buried in the media, he would only burn his own keys. Isotalo and Linden, who trusted too much that Minna Pass's journalistic talents could be shackled to Friend's club cage of the Finnish Security Intelligence Service to publish only information dictated by the Finnish Security Intelligence Service, have now been released from their shackles and harnessed again towards official corruption, and there are no conspiracy theories promulgated by Isotalo to hold them back. Pass's journalistic talents, which eats conspiracy theories like breakfast and arouses cold shivers in the village rallies of the Finnish blue team of stupids, is certainly something that Isotalo did not take into account when booking the Ugandan gig at Trasvuori, and the following explanations compiled by Isotalo are published in Alibi together with Gerionio. Isotalo, which finally scrolls the connection from Linden to the side of conspiracy theories, is a clear sign for me that this connection is protected so strongly that conspiracy theories must be included in the news. These conspiracy theories started by the accused are the clearest sign that then we are actually on the right track. It's easy for Isotalo to talk about these things coldly because he knows the fact, as do I, that Finland's blue stupid group is completely of this group, which leads Finland on a pretty tightrope, and it has no business taking cases forward even if it's a murder. Trasvuori's murder, whose coroner's investigation was approved by THL Sirkukpala, who is apparently always called to the scene when, in the name of the coalition, they put problem citizens in grave in Finnish medical care in the face of the coalition's White King, Sauli Niinisto's murder policy where the Finnish police can be represented by anyone in their line because of the corruption what comes to hiding the murders, but this mantle has fallen onto Central Criminal Police Tro. Hapala's shoulders, at least in this case when he went to accept the criminal investigations carried out by the Ugandan police, which were full of loopholes and tampering with evidence, which only means how in Finland it is possible to murder even a candidate for parliament, where the entire field of authorities is blown into one coal, which will surely satisfy KONE elevators and neo-Nazi Papa pirate Herlin, who has an eye patch missing, based on the pictures. The role of the University of Turku in the case. If the case is looked at from the point of view that services are being pushed into the country for problem citizens suffering from mental health problems, but they still want to frame and forcibly take over our country's mental hospital as a business, which is an absolute prerequisite for the academic careers of researchers at the University of Turku, the activities of Turunen fit almost too well with this purpose, and the activities of the patients they frame and credibility of the behavior. when even a corporate lawyer can be guilty of such unpredictable behavior. So far, only staged problem citizens have fallen into such so-called desperate acts. But after this, these cases are even believable, after the cases of Sanoma Media and Juha Turunen, from perfectly normal working people who have been chased by the authorities, of course, and which does not come up with all cases of working life. This means that in the corporate world, where this activity seems to be spreading, it is possible to engage any citizen who is a little isolated in this kind of activity, which leads to a human rat in our country's mental hospitals when the person is made to act and behave extremely inconsistently. In addition, if you look at the case from the point of view of what unites these persons, Juha Turunen, Minna Nurminen and Antti Herlin, it is this University of Turku, whose specialty in psychiatry is medical research on framed human rats in our country, so it would not be excluded at all that this University of Turku would have already participated in this activity in itself, whose employee Juha Turunen was also, because it benefits at least indirectly from the human rat business of the University of Turku, in that no one can question the role of government agencies in driving these problem citizens into a desperate social trap through systematic activities aimed at driving these problem citizens to the human rat farms managed by the University of Turku. Were others involved? The fake kidnapping of Minna Nurminen. It is not read in the news reports that others were involved in the case. But there is a big question mark as to whether this is the case, because it is a person from Turku who has worked in the corporate world for a long time and a former employee of the University of Turku, and whose actions are partially the same kind of our problematic citizens who have become victims of the Finnish medical care psychiatry, who inflicts this medically non-existent and imaginary diseases upon these patients of their. But there are no evidence from Turunen's background that there would have been the illegal actions from the side of the authorities which would justify such an action as Turunen did in his despair, such as, for example, Jauni Kaupila from Yliviiska, who burned down the church in Yliviiska in revenge for all the unfair actions that were directed at him by the authorities. This partially means that such completely unexpected and desperate actions by a person who is trained and works as a lawyer would now be just as possible as, for example, the uneducated Jauni Kaupila, in the background of which the authorities pulled the same rope for sending Jauni Kaupila to a mental hospital with false statements. However, this kind of behavior is extremely common among our problem citizens when they try the most incredible acts as a last resort against official corruption, which has attacked them at the level of a lawyer, which is extremely difficult to prove, even from me, let alone from the Finnish police who, with the help of their own merits, have wedged themselves into Finland's largest organized crime league. This kind of action, which Juha Turunen dragged along alone, is by no means possible to be carried out by one man, and even though I have declared media mogul Antti Herlin and Minna Nurminen to be the organizers of this case, it is not necessarily possible to accomplish this even with the cooperation of these three, but there could be a very large group behind this media mogul from Herlin's and Minna Nurminen's circle of friends, who can be brought into silence and into this activity, whose future victims will be our country's problem citizens who are wanted in Turku University's illegal human rat business, which it runs with our country's problem citizens who act as Turku University's medical resources. Finnish Minister of Interior and Homeland. The credit pack of the coalition's White King Sauli Niinistö's murderous policy, who has only graduated from vocational school, Irma Grease of Pori, and Homeland, who appears in my criminal investigations more often than Juha Rautaimo, of course leaves me wondering how mechanized and managed Finland's shocking cases are at the ministerial level, because at least the Kauhajoki school massacre showed that there is no real desire to prevent these cases, and at least after the case Jokla massacre. If anything, this could have been prevented, but which is explained by the bureaucracy of the whole world and the inadequacy of the laws, but in the name of which the problematic citizens of our country can be staged and subjected to the human rats of medicine. Anne Homeland, who doesn't even have the training for her position as a minister, has apparently gotten her position as a minister with her unyielding nature and how she has convinced the White King of the coalition, Sauli Niinisto, that she has an Irma grease when it comes to raising public hatred at the expense of bystander victims of problem citizens staged in psychiatric clinics, mismedicated and provoked into actions. When these events that shock society happen, they cause so much anger among the people that it seems to be fuel for the murderous policy of Sauli Niinisto, the White King of the coalition, in the name of which it is good to murder our country's problem citizens in medical treatment and subject them to medical human rats for the illegal medical studies of Jarmo Hayatala and Walter Major Helena of the University of Turku, which they perform medicine on these human rats subjected to forced treatment. Laws. Anne Homeland, whose ministerial tenure is full of incidents that shock society, such as the 2 Finnish school massacres such as Jokla and Kauhajoki. This woman from Pori, who only graduated from a vocational school, appears to be, to say the least, an arrogant basic Finn who could very well be one of the leading figures of the neo-Nazi Finnish resistance movement, in whose ranks Jesse Eputorniainen even kicked Jimmy Cartoonin into bad shape, to say the least, based on her actions when she could not even prevent the Kauhajoki school massacre, which could actually be the end result of the machinations of the minister who carries the white ideology of this coalition between his ears, which has been carried out in close cooperation with the Finnish stupid group, who already have one sure case on their shoulders as I write this, where they have been dragging our country's problem citizens into acts that shock society by means of covert operations, who are finally arrested in the parking lot, otherwise as in the cases of Anne Homeland's school murders, which resulted in many bystander victims. The arrest of this couple in the parking lot was a result of Finland passing a law on the planning of mass murders, which only proves what these laws are for and how they work in Finland, i.e. as a justification to arrest the illegal activities of the police, i.e. the problem citizens drawn into crimes by the police themselves. It is my luck that this vocational school graduated former Interior Minister of the Coalition and Pori's Irma Grease, in all her arrogance, trusted the supremacy, arbitrariness and omnipotence of state institutions, which led her, due to basic Finnish diligence, to make a mistake with the Finnish school massacres, when she engineered 2 school massacres so close to each other, of which Kauhajoki would have been 100% preventable. Where are the fingerprints of Pori's Irma Grease, Anne Homeland? Now, based on these, it could be said that Anne Homeland has had a hand in the game as Minister of the Interior on the side of the police regarding the fake kidnapping of Minna Nurminen, which means, at the very least, enabling the biased operation on the police side, and that there is no one else at the crime scenes than Juha Rautaimo with his own vacuum cleaner, in the wake of which swims the faith and hope of the Finnish police forces, Police Officer of the Year and his entire professional incompetence, Chirianio with his own army of tipsters. Only thing that doesn't support a staged kidnapping. If you look at the matter from the point of view, why would Louhi have carried out this kind of kidnapping? Because the incident will go down in history. Are you ready to publicly ruin your reputation because of Herlin and Turku University professors' desire for power? Sauli Niinisto's murder policy presents the truth behind the fakes. a man who tried to save his wife from a mental hospital. There is a case in Turku where the authorities attacked a couple with these unjust actions, where the man's wife was taken to a mental hospital, using the compulsory medical treatment laws. The man tried to save his own wife from these human rat farms managed by the University of Turku with an axe. But since the Finnish authorities have Nazi German laws created for these cases, it did not lead to anything good for this couple, other than the manhunt created the Finnish blue team of stupids, which is the reawakened Gestapo with blue clothes. The case went to corrupted courts of Finnish country, which is known for the KONE elevator money, on which side it Espoo in the case of fake kidnapping of the Minna Nurminen, and which are owned by the new plague of Europe, the Black Death of problem citizens, the White King of the Coalition, the new rise of the Aryans, and the graduate of the Turku University, Sauli Niinisto, and it escorts extremely harsh sentences alongside this official illegality. He had also threatened 2 employees of the municipality's social services with an explosion, and in addition he threatened to ride a motorcycle through the glass wall of the Naantali town hall. The actions were related to the officials' decisions towards the man's family. This action, where the Finnish authorities make extremely unfair decisions on behalf of our problem citizens, without caring at all about their opinions, is mostly provocative, which together with Jauni Kaupila led to the burning of the Yliviiska church. In addition, the man had run away from the police patrol while they were escorting and guarding him at Turku University Hospital. When the man was put in the police car, he had put his feet down and ran for about 200 meters before he was caught. The man received a suspended sentence. It appears from the verdict that the man had failed to use all the medicines prescribed to him and had been using intoxicants. He had no previous criminal record. The man born in 1995 was finally convicted for causing damage, grossly endangering traffic safety, for the crime of drug use, for assaulting the police, unlawful threat, for violently resisting an official, and about the escape of the prisoner. He received a total of 6 months of suspended imprisonment for his actions. The man was also accused for aggravated deprivation of liberty due to the inclusion of a woman who was in treatment against her will, but the court rejected the charge. If this is not Nazi German activity, then what is?